Hello, nerds! Nerds for humanity! Is Trump's chances of being reelected slipping away right in front of him while Joe Biden does nothing? It could be. It could be that Trump is basically stabbing himself in the leg by being Trump. Let's look at the data. So first of all, here is the national polling over time. And these are averages of multiple polls, so tries to protect against over-indexing on any given outlier poll. Now, as you can see, back in March, the two were actually fairly close together. 50-ish for Biden and probably around 45-ish for Trump. And this is even after being impeached, and by March, starting to really fray at the seams in terms of the coronavirus response. And then you see here back in early April, Biden kind of taking a little hit and actually Trump having a little bit of a bump. But now look at this. It's a 10-point difference. Ever since the beginning of June, there's been this kind of increasing separation between the two. And a 10-point difference is nothing to sneeze at. Now, for those of you who are in the MAGA camp, you might be saying to yourself, national polls, smashnal polls. I don't care about national polls. American presidents are elected by states, and the power is in the states, specifically the swing states. No problem. Let's look at those. Here we go. These swing states. Here are all the key states that are in contention and their current polling averages for Biden versus Trump. As you can see here, if it's blue, that is not good news for Trump. But if it is red, then it is. And there is basically no red here. The strongest opportunity for the MAGA camp is Texas and Iowa. The fact that Texas and Iowa are even in contention suggests that even Republicans are starting to ask themselves, is Donald J. Trump, Ivanka, Jared, Barr, is this the team we want leading us for the next 4 years? Has their handling of the coronavirus, race relations, foreign policy, has it really impressed us? And if you ask Iowans and Texans, apparently, barely. And then if you move up, look at Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, critical state, all now going on the Democratic side, even though these are states that typically, this column here shows these are not Democrat states. These are typically Republican-leaning areas that are now favoring Biden. So this is the beginning of Trump's core support starting to melt away. And the risk to the MAGA campaign is that what's left might just be 6,000 people waiting outside an arena in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But we'll have to see. It's still early. We're now only in June, so you've got several months, which is a lifetime in politics. You never know. Biden could step in it. There could be some big controversy about Hunter. Who knows? But at the moment, if you care about winning electoral votes in key swing states, it is looking very, very tough for Donald Trump. There literally is not a single swing state where Trump is leading by more than 0.5%. In fact, out of these 17 swing states, he is only leading Biden in 2 of them, Iowa and Texas, and even then, barely. So who is still supporting Trump? Let's take a look at the most recent New York Times Siena College poll. And overall, they're sharing an even more dire story for Trump, with him being behind by 14 points. Now, some of you are saying, 14 points. I don't believe polls. Those polls had Hillary Clinton 50 points ahead. 100 points ahead of Donald Trump in 2016, and now look who's your president, snowflake. Well, actually, hold on. Let's look at the actual data. This is from 2016. These are the polls right before Election Day. Yes, Clinton was favored over Trump by these mainstream media polls before the 2016 election, but she was not favored by 30 points. She was not favored by 25 points, not even 20. These polls didn't give her a 15-point advantage. They didn't even give her a 10-point advantage. They gave her a 3.2 percentage point advantage over Trump. And as you recall, she actually did win the popular vote. So they weren't that far off. So before our MAGA friends say that, oh, Trump is going to win in a landslide, it's just going to be like 2016. Remember, 2016 was projected to be a close race. It turned out to be a close race. As of now, 2020 is not looking like it's going to be a close race. Now, for those of you who are never Trumpers, I feel you. I don't want to jinx us, but these are the numbers. Where is Biden showing strength and where is Trump showing strength? So Biden, of course, with all registered voters, up 14 points. He is also up by 22 points with women voters. And which is maybe for some people very surprising because the president says nobody respects women more than Donald Trump. But for some reason, they are not supporting him. On men, it's a much closer. It's just Biden up by +3. So the men do seem to still be sticking with Trump a little bit more than the women did. And then in terms of age groups, if you are under the age of 49 and watching this, and I had to bet, I would bet you are not favoring Trump. However, if you're 50 and over, it's probably a coin toss. If you are a black nerd, very likely you are in the Biden camp. If you are Hispanic, if you are white and went to college, you are pro-Biden. However, if you are white and did not go to college, you will more likely be pro-Trump. Huge difference with parties. 85% advantage among Democrats, 85% advantage to Trump among Republicans. Probably the most important thing is independents, who are about a third of the country, and they are now leaning Biden by quite a margin. In terms of ideology, Trump is doing very well with people who consider themselves very conservative and somewhat conservative. If you're moderate, somewhat liberal, or very liberal, highly likely you're going with Biden. Here's a look at favorability versus unfavorability. Generally, if you are non-white and basically any age, you are not very favorable towards President Trump. I know President Trump has always said that his people love the blacks, but many of the non-white voters do not love Trump. Now, if you are white and you are 65 and older, 42% of that group does have a favorable view of Trump. Now, on the Biden side, he has the most unfavorable among, looks like, 65 and older white people, and he has the most favorable among 65 and older non-white people. Should we look at the deep dive? I think we should. Let's open that bad boy up. Ooh, looky, looky, looky. Now, a lot of people who read these articles don't like to go into the raw data, but you know, this is the Nerds for Humanity channel. That's what we're going to do. Before we get into the deep dive on the raw data, where we're going to look at way more opinions by Americans on a variety of issues, I want to thank members who support this channel. Your membership helps us produce more content, keeps everyone motivated. So really appreciate your help, Kristen Slevin, at the EVP level. At the VP level for the Nerds for Humanity memberships, we got Chris Chan, Laura Lane, Fat Lamb, JM Sap, VLAM. At the hardcore level, we have Kirsch, Jekalago, Phoenix, Koa, Landline, DK, Tracy, David, Mrs. Jones, Gene, Chad, and Mike. And at the verified level, we have Lori, Nell, Elizabeth, Soldier, Emerald, Mercy Ann, Miles, Verily, Doris, Shake and Make, Mike, Sophia, Jadwiga, Gail, James, Hitachi, Your Mom and Peter, Arez, Albert, Brandon, and Yes. And special welcome to Kirsch, our newest member. Just joined a day ago. So welcome, Kirsch. Nerd Power. All right, now let's get into the deep dive here. This is where the action is. So they surveyed 1,400 registered voters. All right, so here's something that we haven't yet talked about. What are people's views on Black Lives Matter? So if you look at who is the most favorable in terms of grouping, it looks like 77% of African Americans, not surprising. 74% of Democrats. 74% of Democrats. Interesting. For independents, only 41% are very favorable, but 68% are either very or somewhat favorable. And then when you think about where's the most unfavorability about Black Lives Matter, it looks like 28% of Republicans are unfavorable. And when you look at the demographics, 65 and older, white and Latino equally unfavorable, about 15% unfavorable. The other thing is when you look at education, 54% with a graduate degree are very favorable. Whereas high school or less, seems like for education, almost all levels of education are equally favorable for Black Lives Matter. Let's take a look at the view of police. So it looks like the most favorable towards the police are whites. 50% are very favorable to police, 30% are somewhat. And it's a different story with blacks, only 13% are very favorable. Hispanics, generally favorable, kind of spread across. In terms of education, some college being the most favorable. And then the most unfavorable around education looks like people with grad degrees have a most somewhat unfavorable. And then party affiliation, 80% of Republicans favorable, 20% of Democrats favorable. If you look at approval ratings of President Trump by African Americans, you'll see that only 13% somewhat approve or strongly approve, and only 28% of Hispanics somewhat approve or strongly approve, whereas 49% of whites somewhat or strongly approve. So it's unfair to say that people who don't like Trump are just painting Trump supporters with a broad brush. When you conduct a random survey of 1,400 people, it turns out that if they're African American, Hispanic, or non-white, they generally do not approve of the president. Okay, what about approval of the way Trump has handled the coronavirus pandemic? He's got 38% approval. How do people think of his handling of the economy? This is where he's got actually 50% approve of his handling of the economy. And I suspect that also translates, again, more males, older, white, high school education, and Republicans in the South. Criminal justice, he has a 39% approval rating. Race relations, 33% approve. George Floyd protests, 29% approve. Right track, wrong track, 31% believe the country is on the right track. In terms of coronavirus, 57% think the worst is still to come, and 34% think that the worst is over. But if you look at race, it looks like even the white people think the worst is still to come. And even high school education thinks the worst is still to come. Seems like everybody's agreed that the worst is still to come. There's no group. Republicans thinks that the worst is over. So there is one group, if you just cut by party identification, they think we're done with coronavirus. So, but pretty much every other group thinks that the worst is still to come. Should the federal government's priority be to contain the spread of the virus, even if it hurts the economy? 55% agree with that, as opposed to restarting the economy at the expense of public health. Regarding the demonstrations, 57% support demonstrations because they're mainly peaceful protests, but 38% oppose the demonstrations because too many have turned to violent rioting. And then this is a question. Today, discrimination against whites has become as big of a problem as discrimination against blacks. Interesting. Wow. Interesting. 49% of the population believes that discrimination against whites has become as big of a problem as discrimination against blacks. That's, wow, okay. Mostly that's, even majority of white people don't believe that. Interestingly enough, 16% of blacks believe that whites are being discriminated against, and 21% of Hispanics strongly agree with that statement. That's really interesting. In general, do you think that the police are more likely to use deadly force against a black person? 54% believe that the police are more likely to use deadly force against a black person, and 37% believe that race does not affect police use of deadly force. So a little over a majority think that the likelihood of deadly force being used against a black person is higher. In terms of criminal justice, is it biased against African Americans? 56% believe that it is biased against African Americans. Here's an interesting one. A year from now, do you expect the economic conditions of the country will be better or worse? And 71% think it'll be either better or much better. So pretty optimistic that a year from now, maybe we'll have a new president. Things will go back to normal, a little bit more science. And then we've got favorability of Black Lives Matter. 66% somewhat or very favorable. And that looks like it's covers most of the raw data. Last thing I'll share with you is if you're interested in Nerds for Humanity merch, there's a link in the description below. It's you can just search for Nerds for Humanity merch on Google. But we've got some cool t-shirts, hoodies, iPhone covers, variety of designs. I think my favorite would be this guy. I have the data. I would probably get it in blue though. Maybe like a dark blue. Maybe not that dark. Maybe not that dark. Yeah, maybe that dark. All right. Hopefully this was helpful. If you find it useful and you like data, give us a like, share us, subscribe. If you really like us, become a member and buy some merch. In the meantime, keep it real. Goodbye, nerds.